I come across a lot of strange things in the woods at night during my job as a ranger. Sometimes it's a deer or bear that makes me feel uneasy. Other times, I hear cracking twigs underfoot or voices in the distance shouting at me to leave. I have seen many creepy things along my years of monitoring the woods at night, and I've heard even more strange stories from other fellow rangers. Sometimes I even think maybe Stephen King is buddies with somebody that works out here in the parks. That's how he has all those constant scary story ideas. Nearly everything I've ever encountered personally, and therefore have been able to verify that it all has been animal-related. But the scariest thing I have come up upon my night patrols was very much the work of humans. At least, I hope so. If it had happened around Halloween, I would have been more inclined to have chalked it up to a prank, a dare, kids just messing about. But Halloween had long passed, and it was now mid-December when I came across the site. We have a large number of hikers passing through these woods, even during the winter months, and there had been some reports of suspicious activity. This basically describes almost anything that can't be categorized, and sure enough, the file just said a lone hiker had reported some blood on the trail. Not enough to think it had been a murder scene or warrant immediate investigation. There had been some, and I quote, unusual noises. It was clearly something that the day rangers hadn't been too worried about. So, off I head in the truck with some powerful flashlights to try and find the reported location. When I get to the place where the hiker had been spotted, I couldn't see the blood at first. It was, of course, very dark. Being after midnight and close to Christmas, and even with the beams on full, the truck wasn't picking anything up on the trail. I was almost at a path that was too overgrown to drive down, so I hopped out with the maglite, tried to see if I could spot anything seemingly suspicious. As I was pushing through the branches and brambles, just wanting to get back to the station for a warm coffee, I could see that not too far in front of me, a lot of the foliage looked to have been trampled down and flattened. I knew this hadn't been done by any of the rangers. I continued forward to check, and I sure found the blood, a whole lot of it. As I shone the flash down onto the ground, there was a giant pentagram painted with the blood. How do I know it was blood and not just paint? The smell and the flies. You never, ever forget the smell of blood. I made a quick sweep of the area just to make sure there weren't any bodies strung up. Preservation of life. And then, hot-footed, back to the truck. Just seconds before I turned the key, I heard a noise like a scream. Very much not human. That was enough, and I drove back to base fast as this thing could go. Let the daytime boys deal with that hot mess. And when they did go back there in the morning, they found all sorts of weird symbols cut into the trees, too. Another strange thing was you can only access that area on foot, and you can only get to that park by car. Huh. Unless that hiker had reported it to cover up their own Satan worshipping, nobody had been down that trail for a long time. How did they get there? Whoever they were. And the blood they used was pig, not wild boar or regular old pig. You'd have thought we might have noticed a party of dudes in black cloaks carrying a dead pig. It sure shook me up. I did not want to head down those parts alone at night for a very long time after. May 14th, 2015. I'll tell you about a pretty epic time when somebody was trying to get me shot at. Well, at least it sounded like gunshot anyway. I was just beginning my shift, which I worked the graveyard, and I heard about what sounded like gunshots coming from one of the areas that are clearly off limits. Of course, you didn't immediately think that somebody is out there looking to hurt you. It was most likely teens maybe shooting cans or poachers, both potentially dangerous if surprised or provoked. but likely more afraid of being caught and taken to the police than anything else. There are plenty of out-of-bounds areas in this particular park I cover, mainly due to we get a lot of sinkholes and subsidence. It is often easier to just block off the area rather than deal with it straight away, since, with most things, budget cuts means less staff and less equipment to make the area safe and whole again. The gunshots and activities seem to be coming from one of the fairly new locations, which was now supposedly closed off due to a particularly bad mudslide in recent storms. In fact, the trail leading up there was pretty much impassable, so I was also concerned if it was even an illegal hunter or a drunken trespassing teen. They were very likely to hurt themselves. Maybe they were even shooting as a distress signal. I get up there and start my search, calling out, using the full beam from the headlight of the truck and the powerful flash to look around. I can't see anything obvious. Nobody is answering me, but I hear 2 shots. I yell to hold your fire, feeling a little nervous now. It wasn't as though the park ranger uniform comes with a Kevlar vest. The shots seemed to be coming from fairly nearby. They were pretty loud, although I didn't see any light. I yelled to stop shooting again and shone my flashlight over towards where the sound seemed to be coming from. Nothing. There was no one there, no sign of anybody having been there. No flattened grass, no footprints in the mud, and no spent bullets on the ground. Bang, bang, bang! I heard 3 shots go off in rapid succession, seemingly from the exact spot I was looking at. But it was impossible. There was nobody there. It could not have been some sort of sniper, and there was nowhere for them to hide. I was getting a little spooked by now when bang! A shot way too close to comfort, whilst utterly incredible due to there being literally no evidence of the shooter. It was enough. As I turned around, deciding that getting out of there was my #1 priority, there were several more shots fired, and I ran back to the truck, speeding off as fast as I could. Tires spinning under me, and when I got back, I was thankful it was in one piece. When I got back, I told my colleagues. They looked very dubious and confused, as I would have been. The park isn't exactly close to any towns, and people have to drive there. There hadn't been any vehicles in the lot since they closed up an hour ago. Everybody who had come through that day had been accounted for and left again. There was a little point going back out there in the dark. Of course, it was still dangerous due to storms and such. The next day, I came in early, having barely slept at all, and went back out with a couple of day rangers who had rifles, just in case. And you know what we found? Nothing. Aside from the tracks from my truck and boot prints from the night before, there were no signs, no evidence anyone had stepped foot in there. Sure, no shells on the ground or spent bullets. I did notice it was awfully quiet in there. One of my buddies even commented that he had goose flesh, although he couldn't explain why. I'd love to say we later heard from the locals there was some sort of ghost story attached to the whole area. At least there might have been some validation to what I thought I had heard. We asked a ton of people, and nobody had ever heard reports of mysterious gunfire before we knew of some Civil War story to account for it. As a park ranger, I have received many strange calls for help over my 23 years in this profession. One day, while on patrol in one of our off-road vehicles, sites in a far-flung area, I received what was believed to be a distress call. It was garbled and the signal kept cutting in and out. But I managed to at least get the general area the person was calling from, and that there was some sort of emergency, sounding like they'd been hurt. It was pretty far out, and there shouldn't really have been any reason for someone to travel up there. It takes me a while, even in a special ORV, to reach the place the call had supposedly come from. And sure enough, in almost the remotest corner possible was a car. Not a truck or a 4x4, just a regular saloon family vehicle, which was almost impossible due to the terrain. How did they get out there? I get out and start calling out to the person. Hello, are you there? And there's no reply. I head over to the car, no sign of anybody, in it or near it. All the doors and even the trunk are wide open, but there's no sign of a person at all. I make all the usual checks, but the odd thing is, despite it being quite dusty up there, and I did notice the car was covered in it, as if it had been there a lot longer than a few hours. There were no footprints or trails anywhere on the car except my own. The hood was cold, so it hadn't been used recently, and the car, including the trunk, was completely empty. I searched around up there for about an hour, feeling more and more puzzled, since there was absolutely no sign of the person who'd made the distress call. I ended up heading back to the office, reporting it to the others, opening a file, and making sure everybody knew to keep a lookout for the person. I also called one of my police buddies down at the station, asking him to run the plates for me. It always takes a few hours for them to call me back, but I was pretty surprised when he turned up at the park, asking me to take him to the vehicle. Turns out, it had been reported stolen a few months ago, before and the owner's ex-partner, who was suspected of stealing it, had been missing the same length of time. No sightings, no credit card use, no cell phone pings. Just vanished, along with the car. It was the same car, and the guy's DNA was all over it. When they managed to trace the call that had been placed, which had been patched through my radio, despite not a single ping since he'd gone missing, it was indeed the man's number. The CSIs came to the car to take away, and said it looked like there had been for days. They searched the area for a very long time, but besides the car and the one-time cell phone call, there was no trace whatsoever that he had ever been there, to the best of anybody's knowledge. He's never been found to this day. Just how did that car get up there, with no damage? How long had it been there, and how come nobody else had seen it until then? Why did the guy call? What was his emergency? And where the hell did he end up?